Hi everybody, welcome to our stream today. Today we are having our very first in-person service at River of Life since our province has gone green. We've taken the month of August to rest and to visit people, and myself, I went on vacation. I know that a few of our leaders did as well, and so we are coming back together again today in person at Riverview to worship together, and this is going to be an interesting move forward as we try to navigate all of the things going on in our world and in our country and in our province, and try to keep safety at the forefront, and at the same time experience some of the freedoms that we have now that we are in the green phase. And so today I want to talk about the future, I want to talk about faith, and I want to talk about fear. Disney has a new streaming show in the Marvel universe called What If? The show retells many of the well-known superhero stories in light of one thing changing and altering the flow of events from what people understand as the story. It becomes an entirely new story. I've watched a couple of these while I was on vacation, and the thing is that as I started thinking about the what if, for me at least, in the current situation, as I started to approach the end of my vacation, the more important question as I got back to work on Wednesday was not what if, but what's next. What's next for us as a province? Even though we're in the green right now, many are still concerned because of children under 12 and the vulnerable among us. What's next for us as a country? We are going into a national election, and much of the country is experiencing a fourth wave with the Delta variant of COVID-19. Will the election be decided not by the will of the people so much as by the fear of the people in going out to vote? Former leader of the NDP, Tom Mulcair, stated in a TV interview on Thursday that he expects this to be the lowest voter turnout in Canadian history. What a projection that is. And the thing is, that wouldn't surprise me at all. As I was reading the lectionary readings for this Sunday, I was struck by God's call to Israel, do not be afraid. I think as a person myself who has a good deal of experience with anxiety in life, the words stand out to me whenever I see them in the Bible. But as I reflected more on the power of fear, I couldn't help but see the common connection between fear and faith. That connection, of course, is the idea of truth. When what we're afraid of is true, fear can actually save our lives. And likewise, when fear is based on untruth, it can hinder our lives and even endanger our lives. Likewise with faith, when it's based on truth, it can actually save our lives. But when it's based on an untruth, it can cause a lot of trouble and sometimes even cause harm. So what holds these two ideas together? Well, both can be helpful and harmful. Faith that you can fly is a harmful idea as you make your descent from the balcony. It would have been better to have faith in your inability to fly. Both faith and fear have in common the notion of what is true. As Christian people, we don't just look to the science and the wisdom of those around us, though we certainly want to look at that. We always want to temper everything in our thinking in light of what God has revealed to us in the Scriptures. In today's readings, we see God declaring an ultimate truth to the people of Israel, a people who were very much afraid. And looking at history, it was reasonable that they were afraid. Yet God gives them a truth by which all other truths needed to be weighed. It's not always an off and on with truth. Sometimes there are competing truths, and we need to choose which path we will go down. And we need to understand the power of what is true, and then determine an appropriate response. This is particularly important now, after over a year of living in a global pandemic. It's something we just need to do as we live a faithful Christian life. And so as we look at God's revelation to us through the prophet Isaiah and some other important scriptures as we go along, let's be reminded again of some basic truths that God seems to remind us about many, many times, so our thoughts are well ordered, and so flowing from a good mind, we can live good lives. The first truth that we see coming from Isaiah 35 is one that is often repeated in the Bible. And because this has been repeated many times by God, we can deduce from that we as human beings have trouble remembering this truth and applying this truth to our lives. So we need to be reminded about it over and over again. And of course, the first thing is, and that is, God is with us. And we see this truth in the early chapter of Genesis when Adam and Eve walked with God on a daily basis in the garden. And it was only when sin invaded the world that this intimacy with God was broken. And what happened in the hearts of Adam and Eve? Well, they became afraid. They were afraid they would be exposed. They were afraid that God would be angry. They were afraid of the consequences of what they had done. But regardless of the cause of their fear, they were afraid. And here we have a story of the all-knowing one who calls out to them to join him. He's still out there. Even though they've departed and hidden and are afraid, God is still there. And so it is with us today. We may be hiding, or we may be afraid, but God is with us. And he will never leave us or forsake us. Isaiah says, to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong, do not fear. The Hebrew word there for strong in this verse can also be translated as courageous, and it has many meanings as you go through the Old Testament. But basically it means to stand firm and to be strong and courageous. And we know that courage doesn't mean the lack of fear. It simply means that in the midst of fear, we still keep moving forward. Why does a person rush into a burning building to save their child? Are they not afraid of fire? Do they not believe that the fire can harm them? I mean, of course they do. But there is a power at work in them that is greater than that truth that fire is harmful. And that, of course, is the love for their child and their desire for their child to be safe. That love for their child makes them courageous in the face of danger. They don't even think about it. Sometimes we're afraid to do things, and sometimes we're afraid to step up in new ways. I remember teaching my daughter to ride her bike in Kincardine, and I kept saying to her, don't worry, I'm right here. And I would run along behind pushing the bike and holding it. And then I got a broomstick, and I pushed it by the handle on her bike and started riding, and she began riding on her own. And as she looked and saw that I was no longer holding on the bike, she doubted her ability at first, but then she realized she could do this. She had this. The power of knowing that God is with us, that he is right here holding us up, and that he has a plan for us and our future, should really direct our thoughts and our actions. This idea must be deeply embedded into our thinking process so it can confront fear and determine whether or not it is healthy or unhealthy. And now the second thing we see from this passage is that God is for us. Isaiah said, "Here is your God." He doesn't say someone else's God. He doesn't say those people's God or the God of your forefathers, although that would be true. He says, here is your God. Paul would reiterate this and develop this idea when he writes in Romans, if God is for us, who can be against us? Now, obviously, since Paul was beheaded in Rome, it was clearly possible that there could be someone against him. But his point is that there is no one of significance against him or us because God, the ultimate one, is for us. Make no mistake, bad things still happen. You know that. I know that. Tragedy still befalls us. And yet in the midst of this, God reveals that he is with us, that he is for us, And that because of that, we can join Paul in another place who said that his problems or his troubles were light and momentary, achieving for us eternal glory that far outweighs them all. But we can only do that, of course, if we believe that the eternal glory of God actually does outweigh all of the troubles we experience. And that's where faith begins. Faith is acknowledging that it does make a difference knowing that God is for us, knowing that God is with us. Faith is allowing that knowledge, that conviction, to weigh in on the decisions that we make and how we understand the difficulties and tragedies of life. I'm not saying that we can or even should get rid of fear altogether. God has created us, after all, with an ability to experience fear. It's an ability that acts as a safeguard against danger. But often signals get crossed. We hide in the bushes like Adam and Eve instead of joining God in this walk of life. We become fearful instead of faithful. And our rehabilitation begins in identifying these key truths that God repeatedly tells us in the law and the prophets and the Psalms and from Jesus himself. So what is next? Where do we go from here? Now, I'm not going to dictate for you, what to do. You know me better than that. But I want to give a few things to ask yourself as we all move forward together. The first thing before we do that, though, is just to understand one more thing, and that is that God owns the future. And we see that in this text. Just as God says he is with us and that he is for us, he also tells us that this world has a very definite future and that God is a part of it. Isaiah says very clearly, he will come and save you. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. You see, there is a confidence that comes from hope. Hope in God's promise to his people, to you and to me. First to the people of Israel, and then, of course, ultimately to his church. So let's keep this simple. In light of the truth that God is with us, in light of the truth that God is for us, in light of the truth that God owns the future, this is the path forward. And it involves three simple determinations. Our first determination is that we must do whatever we can. Once again, I feel I need to say that we should never feel guilty for not being able to do something that we cannot do. I cannot fly. Therefore, I don't feel guilty or ashamed that I'm not attempting to fly. God did not make me to fly or to learn to fly, but He has given me the ability to walk. And so I can walk across the street and check on my elderly neighbor. I can wear a mask and keep a safe distance so they can feel confident in talking with me. I can respect other people and their differences of opinion, even, particularly in this very difficult time. I can love my neighbor as myself. There are innumerable things that I cannot do. And often we think about all the things we cannot do. And when we do that, of course, we're paralyzed. We get frozen. We feel we can't do anything. But instead, a person of faith thinks not about what they can't do. They think about what they can do. And then they do it. Sometimes imperfectly. Sometimes they stumble and they fall. And yet they make the attempt every time because just as James reminds us in the lectionary readings today, faith without works is dead. James talks about belief alone. He says, and truth. James says that the demons believe that God is one and they shudder. They believe it so much that it makes them shake. But does it do them any good? No, it does no good because they keep doing evil. They keep doing things that are contrary to God. They are on the opposite team. They are on the opposite side. It doesn't make a big difference in the world if we believe the right things and never do anything and just sit around and ponder. God calls us to put good thoughts and a good mind, truth, into action. Faith must be activated in life. It is Luther who actually said that we are saved by faith alone, but not by a faith that is alone. Faith that saves always is accompanied by a changed life. They can be seen in faith can be seen in what we do, and we must do whatever we can do to show our love for God and our love for neighbor. To be faithful to our brothers and sisters in our community, and let that faith that we have in God build up His church. The second determination is connected to the first in that we must give whatever we can give. We live in a culture that's constantly looking at what it can consume. It's not an accident that Jeff Bezos is the world's richest man. His company, Amazon, focuses on giving people anything they want at a reasonable price and having it shipped to their door within 2 days. We have hundreds of channels on our television. We have Netflix with endless streaming videos, and then Amazon Prime, and then we have, everybody wants to have a streaming service these days. We have Netflix and Amazon Prime. We have Disney Plus. We have Apple Plus. We have Crave TV. We have Hulu. Well, actually in Canada we don't have Hulu, but my point is still, I'm still on point on this. You can see my point. We are grand consumers, and it is all but impossible for that external reality in our society not to affect us in some ways. How we think, how we interact with the world, it's affected. But God doesn't call us to be consumers. He calls us to be servants. Jesus gives us the example of service when He washes the feet of the disciples. Jesus says we're not better than Him, we're not greater than Him, and so we need to do the things that He shows us to do. What can we give? Obviously, we can give support to God's work financially, and many of you have been doing that over this past pandemic year and a half, and we have been extremely thankful, and we're still here because of you. But there's more that we can do, and more that we need to do. How can we give aid to those who are sick or who are shut in? How can we serve in these times? How can we give? These are questions that need to be pondered and thought upon over and over again in the best of times, and now especially in these times. We have been almost paralyzed for over a year now, and as we crawl out of this pit of pandemic, we need to reinvent new ways to serve and to help those around us. And so our final determination is that we must be present however we can. As I was teaching my Life of Jesus course last year, I was reflecting once again on just how much Jesus did to help the faith of the people around Him. To the blind man, He spit on the ground and then rubbed mud in his eyelids or on his eyelids. And this was a therapeutic thing in the ancient world. People believed that there was power in a holy person's saliva. Now, did Jesus need spit to heal the man of his blindness? Well, of course not. But that man needed to have Jesus do that in order to have faith, in order to believe that Jesus was going to heal him. Over and over again, we see Jesus doing things to help people believe, simply by showing up and giving an example of what a faithful life looks like. He showed up at Simon's house, even though He knew he would be criticized. He showed up at Mary and Martha's house, even though He knew He was going to have a hard conversation with Martha to correct her mindset. He showed up at Lazarus' tomb, even though He would be criticized rather harshly because he was late and blamed, actually, for Lazarus' death. He showed up with a basin and a towel, even though He would need to wash Judas's feet, and even though He knew that Judas would betray Him. You see, Jesus always showed up. Jesus continues to show up, doesn't he? In these times as we move back into our normal, whatever that's going to be, we need to follow Jesus' example. He didn't turn away because it would be hard. He cried out in the garden, before the crucifixion. If there was another way, he would be gladly, open to that. But his primary concern was not what he wanted, what he had peace with. His primary concern was that God's will would be done. And we need to follow Jesus' example in this. We need to become servants of others, just like Jesus was. We need to become true lovers of God and neighbor, just like Jesus was. And at least part of this means that we must do whatever we can, we must give whatever we can, and we need to show up whenever we. It seems to me that this is simply living life in light of the truth that God has made known to us. That truth that God is with us, that God is for us, and that God owns the future. It's time for us to join together. It's time for us to move forward, moving forward as God's people, as a people of faith. It's time to put fear behind us and to trust in the truth of God. Let's pray together. God, we ask that you would help us to believe the things that you have claimed to be true more than the things that cause us fear. Help us to be reasonable. Help us to be thoughtful. Help us to be adhering to the science and be critical thinkers. But also, God, help us to have faith. Help us to believe you more than ourselves. Help us not to be proudful and full of that arrogance that comes from believing that we know best. Help us, Lord, rather to be humble like Jesus was. Though he was God, became a servant, became human, and dwelt among us, and suffered death, even death on the cross. And so, Lord, teach us to be servants as well. Teach us to have faith and to reach out. Teach us, O God, to truly be a people of faith, reaching our world with the love of Jesus Christ. We pray in his name. Amen. Well, thank you for joining us here at River of Life Online. We will be back again in 7 days, and I hope you will be too. Until then, God be with you. Relevant, practical, authentic. River of Life.